we are in the middle of talking about contracting a muscle. And what's going to ultimately happen is these action potentials are going to arrive at a muscle, and it's going to signal the muscle to do something called a contraction cycle. And this involves the sarcomere and the actin and myosin contractile proteins. So I'm going to go to our PowerPoint. This is PowerPoint page number 24. And we're going to go over the contraction cycle. And then I'm going to conclude this video with our Handout 10E. So a muscle contraction cycle is going to be a repeating set of steps where the actin and myosin are going to slide together. So it says there are 4 steps to the contraction cycle. We're going to need ATP to run the muscle contraction. We're going to have to attach the actin and myosin together. That forms what we call a cross bridge. Then we're going to slide the actin and myosin on each other. That's called a power stroke. And then we are going to need to add another ATP to do it all over again. And this is going to continue as long as we have energy, ATP, and calcium. So let me show you how this is going to work exactly. The next slide kind of has a series of events. Remember, we have this action potential, this nerve impulse moving through the muscle. It's going to move through the muscle down the transverse tubules to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is going to release its calcium, and that calcium is going to flood into the sarcomeres, and the calcium is going to bind to troponin, this regulatory protein, and move it. See how the troponin is actually blocking the actin from the myosin? The calcium moves it so the actin and myosin can bind together, right? That's called a cross bridge. Now, what that does is it kicks us into this contraction cycle. So this is really just the same picture. See, here we have actin, we have myosin. We've got the calcium stuck to the troponin. So this contraction cycle is going to start because the calcium moves the troponin away so that the actin and myosin can stick together. So when that happens, the actin and myosin form what's called a cross bridge. See, they're connected. They're not connected here. The calcium opens the troponin, actin and myosin can stick together. We get what's called a cross bridge. Now, the myosin is charged with energy. So we've got this ATP that has jumped on and it's charged it. Now, this energy in the myosin is going to pull the myosin along the actin. So as they slide together, we get what's called a power stroke. So this actin and myosin are attached together. The myosin's going to pull on the actin, and that's going to contract your muscle. That's called a power stroke. Now, when that occurs, we burn the energy, and the energy's gone. So another ATP must jump on to the myosin to charge it again. But when that happens, the ATP knocks the myosin off of the actin, and then that troponin jumps on and blocks the two again. So then we're back to the first picture where we have to have another calcium come in, move the troponin. We get this charged ATP, myosin head grabbing onto the actin. That's a cross bridge. And then the energy slides the two. That's a power stroke. And then we've used that energy. A new ATP jumps on, breaks off the myosin head. And we continue to perform this contraction cycle over and over and over again as long as we have ATP and calcium. Now, remember back in chapter 6, I told you that calcium is required for a muscle to contract. It's because it moves troponin and allows the actin and myosin to stick together and form this cross bridge right here. Now, some of you might also notice that we've got an ADP, and that might kind of confuse you. I want to just explain that a little bit here. So I'm going to go to my document camera. So ADP is ATP. It's just been used. So ATP is known as adenosine triphosphate. That's where the T comes from. So basically, it is a molecule. I'm just going to draw this very simple. It's a molecule that's got 3 phosphates hanging off of it. Now, these phosphates, remember from chapter 2, these phosphates are bonded together, and it turns out that the bond between the second and third phosphate is where the energy is. So we break this bond and we release energy. So when we do that, we break this third phosphorus off of the molecule. So the molecule is now only got 2 phosphates. This third one has broken off. So now we have adenosine diphosphate. Di means 2 phosphates. So anytime you see ADP, it is an ATP that has used its energy. It's broken that bond. That's all that means, all right? And it's just kind of handy to know if you get into more biochemistry and stuff, you'll want to know that. But that's why it's showing you ADP. See, that third phosphate's broken off right here, and then it's gone. We've energized the myosin head. Now, what's interesting is also this contraction cycle, we are continuously contracting, relaxing, because when this new ATP jumps on the myosin head, it breaks the actin from the myosin, so the sarcomere relaxes. So what happens is when let's say you're doing a bicep curl, and you're doing this bicep curl, right? It seems like it's a smooth motion where all of your sarcomeres are going like that, but that's not what's going on. What's happening is the sarcomeres are contracting, relaxing as you are contracting the entire muscle. So all these sarcomeres are doing this. So they attach, power stroke, and then the next ATP breaks them off and they relax. So we've got this continuous contraction and relaxation, this contraction cycle that's going on to get this smooth muscle contraction. So the whole muscle's contracting, but all these sarcomeres are contracting and relaxing through this contraction cycle that you're looking at. And this is why you get tired. Why do you get tired? Well, you get tired because you run out of ATP. And when you run out of ATP, we can't keep this cycle going and your muscles get tired. All right. So that leads us to Handout 10E. Now, Handout 10E is nothing more than just a review of everything I've been talking about in the last several videos. All right. So if I open this up, it's going to talk about each step of contracting a muscle. All right. So I'm just going to go over this really quick, and then we'll almost be done with the chapter. We only have a few more slides to go, and I'll do that in a next video. But so here is our neuromuscular junction, right? So what happens is the nerve impulse comes down, hits the presynaptic terminal. Remember, it's got acetylcholine vesicles. This action potential tells calcium to gush in. Calcium gushes in, releasing acetylcholine vesicles into the synaptic cleft. Acetylcholine then travels to the muscle. This is the muscle cell right here, and opens up the sodium channels on the muscle cell. This causes the action potential to jump from the nerve to the muscle. Once in the muscle, it spreads through the sarcolemma. So remember, the sarcolemma is just the plasma membrane. It's got a fancy name, but it's just a plasma membrane of the muscle. The reason why it has a different name is because it conducts this electricity. So the sarcolemma is going to spread this action potential through the muscle. Now remember, the muscle has these tubes called transverse tubules. So the plasma membrane has these invaginations that carry the action potentials deep into the cell. So the action potential is going to move through the transverse tubules to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that's what I've got right here in red. So we've got this sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now the sarcoplasmic reticulum contains calcium. That calcium is then released. It dumps out, goes to the sarcomere. Now, what calcium does is it says that calcium binds to troponin. Oops, got to raise that up a little bit. Calcium binds to troponin, forming a troponin-tropomyosin complex. It moves the troponin out of the way. So this calcium is required for a muscle contraction. Now, once that occurs, we go into this contraction cycle that I just talked about. So this is just, the same thing. So we've got ATP on the myosin head. The calcium moves the troponin. The actin and myosin can stick together. That forms a cross bridge. Once the cross bridge is formed, then the actin and myosin slide together. That's called the power stroke. When that happens, we use the energy. A new ATP from the mitochondria has to jump on. That breaks the myosin from the actin, causing the whole thing to relax, and we're back to the first picture. So we just have this cycle running over and over and over again as long as we've got ATP and as long as we have calcium. Now, notice this one thing, because I know it could be on the test. Calcium is actually playing two roles, right? Calcium is in the nerve, allowing the nerve to release its acetylcholine vesicles. So calcium is there, and calcium is in the sarcoplasmic reticulum that uncovers the troponin and allows the actin and myosin to stick together. So you cannot have a muscle contraction without the calcium. All right? So remember, calcium does three big things. It is involved in these muscle contractions. It's going to clot blood, and we'll talk about that later. And then remember, it builds bone. So we have three things that it's doing, and it's part of this contraction cycle. So our contraction cycle, just make sure you know it really well, and follow this handout, fill it out, build it, and then make sure you know each of the steps. So that's going to wrap it up for this video, and we have one more before the end of this chapter. It's going to summarize everything, and then we'll be ready to move on. All right. We'll see you later.